The Witcher, Hexer, Chapter 3, Love Endureth. Duny was taken in Pavetta's chambers and cared for. She wiped the side of his head with a wet towel as they talked in private, finally without a worry caused by the secrecy of before. She smiled at him and was then disturbed by her mother, the queen. She came inside the princess's room with the long-bearded, dark-robed druid and another mustached elder, looking humbled and in shock. "It dawns, and you're still wearing a human face," the queen first spoke, facing her daughter and her husband, then turned to speak with the druid. "You released him from the accursed enchantment by saying I give you Pavetta," the dark-robed druid claimed. "My lady, you disappointed me. This is not my world. You've done so much." Geralt addressed the queen, then was interrupted by the princess. "Geralt, for us, for me, please stay," Pavetta asked, then Duny. "I beg you too. I'll do whatever you wish," Duny pleaded, trying to bargain for his love's sake. Geralt was too humble of a lone white wolf. "I want nothing," he said, as he turned and lowered his head. "You can't just leave like that. I know you don't like me, but I must reward you," Duny begged as he lay down with sweats. The dark-robed druid intervened. "He can only ask for the right of surprise. Leave him alone. Geralt, leave this place, please." Geralt began to walk out the door when Duny pleaded again, raising his voice in desperation. "Stay, let's break even and put it behind us. He'll return to claim something. I know his kind." Geralt looked at them with pity as he turned back, reminding Duny of something that refreshed his mind. "You promised to give me what I desire, right?" "Yes," Duny gave a quick, solitary nod. Geralt walked close and stood over the bedside next to Pavetta. "You'll give me what you don't know you got. I'll return to see if fate has favored me." Then, as soon as Geralt spoke these words, he turned to walk away, gone from Pavetta's chambers. "I was meaning to tell you," Pavetta looked with pity at Duny, her love, and continued with some shocking news. "I'll give birth to a baby." The song played out from the bard as he sung his song while Geralt went off on his steed. "Don't leave the trail of fate, which spells fight. Your sword will not rust, but gleam with blood. For you possess the right of surprise. Whoever tries to deny it will be struck down." And so the song goes. Geralt came to a place where there was trouble from a stranger monster to kill it, and so he did with a quickness like a master hunter. A young man tried to take advantage of Geralt's trust, but was reprimanded by his father as the Witcher came out from the cave with the absurdly bizarre monster carcass. The father kindly told his son, "Leave the saddlebags, they're not yours." "Says who?" the young man disrespectfully answered, as he still tried to carry away loot. "None of your business." The father gave heed and more than enough warning at a last chance to his son before he would be caught by Geralt, who was coming out of the cave entrance soon. This young man's father looked on as Geralt came into the light of the outside from the tunnel. He tried to rationalize the attempted theft to his poor father, telling him, "You're not armed. This is no good." Then the young man pulled out a rusty blade from his belt, almost threatening. The father, with no fear and a disappointed gaze, gave his reproof. You're wrong. My weapons follow me. And he turned to his hidden warrior women of the deep forest. They were clothed in light animal furs, mud clay paint, and wielded excellently crafted to precision javelin spears. These fantastic warriors came out of seemingly nowhere, with no warning, and caught the boy off guard. His father knew he would need protection, as this defiant young man was hanging out with a bad crowd of thieves. Geralt dropped the carcass of this two-headed beast on the ground once he dragged the thing out past the cave entrance. The cavernous home of this terrorizing monster made Geralt's face dirty, covering him with soot. The strange creature didn't even faze him, although it shocked everyone else a little once they saw the unnatural anatomy of an already freakishly recognized monster. The two heads of this thing were on either end, where a tail should be. It was like a grifting experiment by nature in the womb of mutation. This thing had wings that looked like they belonged to the beaked lizard head, but the other head had arm-like legs. This thing was able to pick up children of considerably large size and fly away with them, ripping children in half in the air, giving the upper half of the dismemberment mid-air to the beaked head with wings, so it could feast on the open skull, while the lower half enjoyed intestinal lining of the helpless victims. Geralt's first words out the cave were about the money for the monster carcass. The deal was 200 groschen. Geralt dropped the carcass down to the ground and took his measly fee grudgingly. I stick out my neck for peanuts, and you try to rob me? Geralt made the crowd of thieves scatter like cockroaches with one stomp on the ground. But we haven't, one of the slower, fatter men squealed out in fear as he barely was able to evade. You've forgotten something, the boy's father intervened. What, sir? The young man sarcastically asked, knowing the answer. You pulled a knife on me when I was unarmed, the man said, as he knelt down while examining the strange beast's carcass. One of the warrior women of the forest slapped the young man with the force of a strong punch, giving him whiplash in his neck. The boy's father felt no remorse for what had happened. Geralt came close to the man and told him, a fine blow. I'm Borch, 3 jackdaws, the man answered Geralt. Geralt had become bonded with 3 curly-haired men. Geralt had become bonded with this curly-haired man as he introduced him to his daughters. They're me girls, T and V of Zerica. Geralt of Rivia, the Witcher gave his name, establishing his legacy as the legendary Hexer. Tea and Via turned to look toward Geralt in their father's direction as the warrior sisters guarded the edge of the forest by the clearing, opposite the direction of the cave entrance where they stood. At this time they joined together in travels. The girls had never been impressed by a man until seeing Geralt. Their father noticed the attraction to the Hexer, but knew he must ignore if he wanted to live and to stay away from any trouble with his feral daughters. They were as wild as the wild cats of the forest. Geralt came back to the old inn where he loved to drink his cares away since becoming a young man. He quickly drank himself to slurred speech as he sat at the table closest to where he could be served. Wiping his face, he spoke with his eyes beginning to roll in his head while he spoke to Borch, as Tia became too clingy to her father. Try to understand. I can't have any doubts, but I have my prince. I kill aggressive beasts that threaten men and spare those that fear men. They have the right to live, as they threaten nobody. Tia fed her father a piece of pickled bar food from behind as she picked at his shoulder like a little girl would, bugging her dad. That disagrees with Min's interests, Borch said as he took the piece of food from Tia's hand. I don't care about those, Geralt was talking about those interests of Min. Don't you defend them? Borch said, referring to Tia and Vea, who had come to also stare at Geralt as she put herself behind her sister. Men's lives, not interests, Geralt clarified, looking drunker than ever. What don't you kill? Borch pried. If you insist, I'll tell you. I don't slay dragons. Geralt changed his tone very seriously. The most dangerous. Borch acted as if Geralt were afraid of dragons to see what his thoughts truly were about his abilities. Geralt squinted with a cocky expression. No, it's quite simple. Rather than attack people, they ran away. Men hunt dragons. But they kill sheep, cows, Borch taunted Geralt in their drunkenness. A dragon's no mouse. It eats a lot. Since man has cut down forests, killed off game, and left them little space to live, what can they do? Geralt was beginning to become overly emotional about this, so Tia came to comfort him in his silliness, making Borch laugh a little too much, while Vea rolled her eyes and closed her lids to ignore the pointlessness, as it began to annoy her. Vea smiled when her father then said to Geralt, You amaze me. That's what gives me trouble. Geralt grinned as Vea also came to his other side to comfort him. The sisters were becoming too familiar with Geralt, caressing his sides, and he was enjoying this a little too much in front of their father, yet Borch was feeling too good from the strong drink they shared. But aren't dragons wonders of nature? Geralt said, making Borch and his daughters smile, silently laughing mischievously. Geralt continued to speak of what he knew of dragons. They breathe fire, sail the skies, and guard treasures only for fun, and aren't vindictive or envious. Why kill them? They're beautiful. When Geralt said they're beautiful, he was talking about the dragons, but Borch saw that Geralt was looking at his daughters, Tia and Vea, as they caressed him more aggressively. They think it's a compliment. Be careful. They're tireless as lovers. They like you, damn it. They do indeed. Borch gave an awkward smile, then walked to the pisser to cover up his anger. Geralt then spoke to Tia first, since she came first to his side. What's your name? Alvianeri, Tia said with a smile. Pretty. Geralt said with a drunken look of excess. The sun had risen above the clouds that next morning, and the shadow still covered the land. Once the sun broke through, Geralt of Rivia rode his steed ahead of the pack to lead the way. They came to a bridge guarded by a man who was put there by the Queen of the Forest. Why can't we pass? Geralt asked the guard, who looked like he didn't even want to be there. My orders. He threw his royal guard's spear into the soil, making it stick like a dart. Geralt jumped off horseback to confront the man as he still sat with his back against the wall of the bridge entrance. Geralt asked, Why, this is a free land. Don't you know it, creep? Leave me alone, the guard didn't want any trouble. Well, we'll ride to Hengfors along the bank. Geralt settled for the long way. Aren't you chasing the dragon? The guard asked with squinting eyes from the sun. What dragon are you talking about? Borch asked with a sense of wonder and skepticism. The bard came out from the door of the bridge tower eating a chicken leg, and Geralt was just as excited to see him as he was. Geralt! Geralt laughed gleefully while the singer introduced himself to the new followers, which made up the group. I'm Yeskir, the bard and poet. He threw his chicken bone behind him, over his shoulder, and tried to look serious, although he was being intentionally comical. Some girls call me peerless. Jaskier then began to play his 10-stringed instrument, reciting his latest work. At the break of dawn, when the sun rose, Geralt cut him off as soon as Jaskier began with these words. "Speak plainly, will you?" Geralt butted in. "Don't I?" Jaskier looked genuinely upset and put his instrument down to come close to the fire by where Geralt and Borch sat. Jaskier the Bard sat beside them and told what he knew to be true from his own eyes and the word of the land as well, which became common knowledge these past few days. A dragon landed in the pastures. Once again Geralt of Rivia cut him off mid-sentence, this time to test him. "A dragon because it suits your ballad?" The Bard filled their heads with a wild tale. "I saw it with my own eyes. The local shoemaker had an experience. They gutted a sheep, stuffed it with herbs, sulfur, and tar, and put it in the middle of the flock. Little did they hope the dragon would fall for such stinking shit. But it swallowed the bait." Borch sat with his forearm on his knee, intrigued. "Keep talking, Jaskier," he insisted. "First it seemed struck dead. Before long it started to roar, somersault, and breathe smoke. Then it weakened and lay down motionless. 2 men came forward to see if it still breathed. We soon buried them under a mound." The Bard looked grieved as he sighed. "Was it still alive?" Borch asked with childlike curiosity. "And how? It put itself together and flew away, and it disappeared in the gorges of the Kestrel Mountains." Jaskier spoke like a historian, which he was. "It's clear. It must have been lethargic. The mountains must hide its treasure, hence the blocked passage. Someone wants to grab the treasure. It's King Nedimir of Caingorn." Geralt spoke like a prophet that was filled with knowledge from a higher power. "Right. He shut out the competition and the Holopolans who want to slay the dragon too. Hence his mounted soldiers and the call for dragon slayers." Jaskier the Bard finished telling all he knew, and Geralt walked away from him with Borch following by his side, insisting to go through with the mission to go to the dragon. "Let's join them." Geralt was suspicious of Borch's eagerness and wondered if there was an ulterior motive. "Because of the loot?" "Not necessarily." Borch clearly gave himself away as he imagined unreal treasures. "The dragon interests you?" Geralt suspiciously asked as the two walked away to talk and hopefully not be heard by the Bard. "Some want to kill it. Others like you have their principles. And I see a third way." Borch jabbed. Geralt stopped walking and said, "If I understand correctly, I mean, if I get it, you want to stop them. Don't you reveal your designs. They'll kill you the first chance they get. To save the dragon, we must kill them. I can't do it, or watch it be done, I'm sorry." "All right, I'll do it alone. Thanks for the warning." Borch looked over Geralt's shoulder as if he had seen a ghost. A dark-haired woman came with a guard on horseback. They were barely noticed, as they were moments away from being close enough to converse. "The king set off. We're only waiting for you." The guard sped up to tell this dark-haired woman, clothed in dark red, as she went straight towards Geralt. Geralt and this dark-haired woman locked eyes, and everything changed. His loins gave way. If Geralt weren't the Hexer he became, he would have dropped to his knees, or maybe straight to his face with the attraction that hit him. She, too, had been overcome with such intense attraction that the sensation was otherworldly, and they both knew at once this was a supernatural attraction that neither could deny, even if they tried. Everything slowed down, and the sense of urgency was replaced with a serene, relaxed tone from the vibe this dark-haired woman brought with her. She couldn't bring her steed in close enough. as thought she couldn't look long enough upon Gerald and the look he gave her. This was absolute magnetic mysticism of purely naturistic need within their hearts. When she came close enough to recognize, he saw who she was. "Welcome, Yennefer." Gerald became humbled and shaken in his gut. She looked almost expressionless, yet the feeling could not be hidden from him, as Gerald knew she had intense feelings for him, even still, since they last seen each other. "You've met?" Borch asked as he drew himself near to Gerald. "Yes, once." Gerald thought of the time when he recovered in bed and Yennefer first came to him, reviving his spirit, caressing his face with her gentle touch, and waking him to drink from a golden cup from her hand. She even lifted his head to help Gerald take the drinks he needed to regain his strength. Yennefer sat with Gerald while he healed from his most terrible wounds in those early times of his beginnings as a witcher. Gerald contemplated that agonizing time when he experienced death pains, yet did not die, and so the bedridden experience was all the more painful. Yet Gerald forgot the pain as if it disappeared when Yennefer came to tend to him and his wounds. She was magical, and he knew it. The way she looked at him, there was no denying it. Gerald always became entranced by her, or so he thought. He didn't realize that what he really felt for her was nothing more than true love. He never had this concept because of his lifespan surpassing any idea that he would obtain love with someone he would outlive by far. This killed the thought of love for him before it could ever begin with any woman. And so he chose the path of the lone white wolf. In Gerald's mind, there was no other way. The life of the Witcher chose him, since the night he was born, and he knew that as much. The Hexer life was the only one he could accept in his rationalization. There was no room in his mind for love, only in forms of the endless hunt. Yet in this moment when Yennefer came back to him, he was brought right back to that moment when she first came to him, and Gerald relived those conversations in immaculate detail. Gerald remembered the first thing he told her when he was strong enough to speak again. "You're a very beautiful lady," Gerald first told her while he panted on his back like a dying old dog. "Call me Yennefer. I'm a sorceress. We're bound by trade." She was starry-eyed as the two gave their first notion of attraction. She put a medallion around his neck once they undressed themselves. Then immediately after this, neither one of them could contain themselves as their feelings of intense burning passion within their loins took over. Gerald kissed Yennefer's body passionately as he slid himself inside her. The love they made in that time was unlike anything Gerald ever knew before, and he didn't understand why, thinking it was only because she was a magical sorceress. Never did it occur to him that she was sharing feelings of instantaneous love, since they revealed each other's hearts in their vulnerability. Gerald of Rivia remembered resting his head on her heart to feel what the beating would tell him, if anything. All he remembered was the beating of strong and steady, like the love they made. All he remembered was the beating was strong and steady, like the love they made. Geralt thought on these things as Yennefer rode away, with that faithful and loyal royal guard by her side, and he did not worry if they were intimate or not. He knew it didn't seem to be possible, even though a stranger would think otherwise. He was enough of a lone white wolf anyway to forgive her for anything. Along with his many lifetimes, he had already lived. In the years of a Hexer, he had lived in several timelines as a Witcher, yet these years were counted as young, for his life would surpass many countless others as they blended together. This is also what made Geralt of Rivia so callous and numb to the concept of love. Women came and went in his life, through death, despair, treachery, and unfaithfulness. He had let himself become a tramp, which was the irony of the situation, since this is what his father called the chameleon count and false witcher who came to his father when he was taken to be mutated in the hexing ritual. Geralt thought of himself as a long since broken man. Yennefer thought of herself as a broken woman, and this was what bonded them in their spirits unknowingly. As he ate with Geralt, Borch spoke with a mouthful to the old guard. "Your orders, officer, are for the mob and the riffraff, not us noblemen and knights. I can't let pass only those who can kill the reptile." The royal guard answered Borch hastily. "You know this?" Geralt took his medallion around his neck in one hand and put his other arm around the back of the guard's neck to show his White Wolf Witcher sign directly in the guard's face. This royal guard changed his demeanor very quickly, asking Geralt, "Are you a Hexer?" Geralt was taken with his riders down to the tents of the royal guards who were with Yennefer. These were extravagant tents unlike anything for a span of 1,000 years. The magnificence of their construction would be difficult to emulate, being the reason why. They gave the appearance of enchantment and radiated some kind of strangely spiritual glow of mysticism that could only be explained in layman's terms as magical. They had a thick, leather-like material that must have been from waterhorse hide, which is similar to a manatee for reference, yet the large striped colors of the walls were of a bright golden yellow, along with an orangish red. The tops of the tents were large pillars about 3 feet in length, with a red ball on top. These tent poles were spiraled red and golden yellow. Many guards were there, too many to count. Each of them were operating in their own accord, appearing to be relaxed with loose orders. This was a good sign for Geralt of Rivia and his riders, since they were basically a band of misfits. Once arriving before nightfall, Geralt let out a sigh that did not go unnoticed by the bard. Once nightfall did come, Geralt went out by the water's edge. Moonlight, along with the light of the tent torches, reflected beautifully upon the blackened silver water. Who Geralt was looking for was already gazing alone into the water, and he called to her name, Yennefer. She turned around rather quickly, only to give a hard look, almost squinting with resentment, while then letting out a small sigh of her breath. "You've come here because of the dragon? The same old story?" "Yeah, the same old story in every respect." Geralt somberly spoke like an already defeated man by her words and her expression before Yennefer spoke. "No, Geralt, we weren't meant for each other. I couldn't tie myself to someone who leaves at night, never knowing where he returns from. Why, it just was as it was. You're like a tumbleweed. Yesterday you killed the basilisk, and today you're off God knows where and why. As a Hexer, you're aimless, because you can't have an aim, only to kill another monster." Yennefer, for the first time, gave words from her heart and revealed some sort of feeling since she came back into Geralt's life. "That's the way I was made. And what's your aim? Why are you here?" Geralt took a few steps back after being close enough to touch her before she spoke. "Do you remember? Ever a dreamer. I want to bear a child, but I can't. I've heard of possible extracts from dragon's tissue, and with this nothing more needed to be said." Geralt looked upon Yennefer with deep pity, which sank his heart into his stomach, while he understood her reasoning without any need to argue. The next day the royal guards had awakened before sunrise, so their steeds were riding along in marches at the break of dawn. The dust from their hooves clouded the ground, giving a smoke screen of sorts to the ground troops that followed behind the riders. Designated men pushed and pulled large carts on wagon wheels, filled with weapons and supplies. This was a big mission these hundreds of men went on in the early morning, before the day would become hot. When armor, chainmail, and helmets sit out in the sun all day, this is a most unpleasant sensation on the skin, especially the head and face under the helmet, even if there is no mask. The horses were well fed and filled with good water, so their going was strong alongside the long hills, alongside the many mountainsides. Borch had a lingering question for Geralt, as he knew what he would ask also pressed on his daughters' minds. "What's the buzz in high places?" Borch squinted, looking up at Geralt on his steed. "Everyone blather about his calling. Nidamir wants to take over a principality. Ich to defend damsels and dragons." Geralt spoke while calming his horse's restlessness, as the steed wanted to continue the march with the others. "Ah, and Yennefer?" Borch gave a look of contempt as he turned his neck sideways. "Let's forget it, Borch. It's over and done with." And that was that. Nothing else was said of the matter at this moment, as Borch dared not to say anything inciting further inquiry. Upon his horse, after riding for some time, an unseen man had thrown a coin against the large pile of rocks, which was like a small wall running long ways against the edge of the mountainside which they rode. "What happened?" Tia, Borch's daughter, asked Geralt, as they rode next to each other while hearing the sound of stones falling. "I'll go and see," Geralt insisted. "Stay," Borch suspiciously told Geralt when he came and found him by the tumbling avalanche. "Why?" Geralt looked at Borch with a look of disgrace. Just then, larger rocks tumbled down the hillside that were dominoed in a snowball effect that came close to where they were. Rocks broke off the mountainside, creating further calamity and setting up for potential disaster, yet Borch was still insisting for them to not move. "Stay," Borch asked Geralt and his daughter Tia once again, this time as they rode away in haste with good reason. Many men were hit with stones that came down in a thunderous force. This became a terrible disaster for the royal guards, pinning many men near death and worse. Yennefer was clinging to the mountainside, holding on for her life, as there was a thick foggy cloud of dust from the fallen rocks which broke off. Geralt yelled for the sorceress, "Yennefer!" Geralt could not see through the thick cloud of broken rock debris. "Here!" she exclaimed, looking down with muddying eyes from all the painful rock dust. Once again, as he came closer to her voice, Geralt yelled more for the sorceress, "Yennefer!" Again, with even more desperation, Yennefer yelled again, as her fingers began to hurt from the grip against the mountainside, which cut into her flesh. "Here!" Geralt climbed down to her very quickly with a secured cord holding him up at the top of the falling rocks. As they had barely had enough time to stop tumbling down near them and under his slipping feet, Gerald's feet slipped in his boots as he tumbled down the same path those small rocks and larger broken stones fell. There was no explaining how Yennefer survived, as many rocks fell right over her head, bouncing off her back many times. The impact was not direct, and so she survived, since the bouncing of stones off of the mountainside kept their momentum quickly shooting away instead of towards her. Yennefer was flat against the cubbyhole where some larger rocks broke off from that mountainside. Gerald's belt he used to fasten the cord, which he used to descend down to Yennefer, snapped and broke as soon as he pulled Yennefer's hand up towards him. This happened as soon as Gerald got to her, so the commotion came quickly, with no relief from this disastrously tense situation. There was no letting up, either figuratively or literally. Gerald of Rivia now had to hang on with one hand, and only a little lower than where Yennefer's hands held herself just before he took her hand to be rescued. "Cast a spell, damn it!" Gerald begged as he grunted. "How, hanging?" Yennefer explained the impossibility considering their dire situation. In desperation, Gerald asked while fumbling his grip against the rough stone wall, "Can't you find a foothold? Can't you do something with your legs?" Yennefer had a difficult time even getting out words from her exhaustion. "Only wag them." "Chin up!" Gerald wasn't saying these words merely for show, but actually meant for her to look up, as to see what to do. Gerald pulled Yennefer up as she cried out in pain. He brought her up close to his bosom, chest to chest, in a tightly held embrace with one arm, as he held onto the mountainside with only one hand, then guided her hand to cling onto his back, where his sword was fastened, so he could use both of his arms to pull them up to the top. The faithful historian, who was their bard, sent his regards of encouragement from the bottom of the calamity of fallen broken stones and smaller rocks. "Hang in there! Give me a rope!" Jesker was attempting to help as fast as he could with assistance, as he panicked while watching his friends hang on for their lives. "Give me some rope!" Gerald bared his teeth like an angry, wounded wild animal. "I can't hang on any longer," Yennefer cried out, hanging on to Gerald's back while slipping from her best grip that was left in her hurt hands. "Fetch some rope, else they both fall down." Borch's thief's son, with his posse of outcasts, watched from the top, a ways away, as to see from a distance this calamity, while the bard yelled at them to help. One of the bastards with Borch's son said something foul that would get him thrown off the mountain if Gerald would reach him, insinuating his lack of care for their lives to be dashed to bits at the bottom of the fallen rocks. Maybe they should. Yennefer expressed her love with a hard sentiment to Gerald as she slipped. "Save yourself!" "No, hang on!" Gerald yelled with all his might, as in this moment he knew that he was loved. Then she said it without trying, honestly. "Gerald, I can't love, forgive me. Gerald, I can't love, forgive me." As she referred to Gerald as her love, her last bit of strength left her hands, slipping down Gerald's leg. But his hand went and found hers like a flash of lightning, gripping with the strength of 10,000 white wolves' jaws, and she screamed in terrible pain, yet thankful she was saved by his mighty hand. Gerald pulled Yennefer up with such incredibly impressive strength, it had to be seen to be believed, as she held onto the rope that the bard had thrown down with only one arm. Gerald never was even heard in all the content. There never was even heard in all the content of such a man who could do such a thing, ever in all the records of time. Gerald climbed up the mountain using his boots against the rock wall, and immediately Yennefer followed the example as they were close to the top, relieving Geralt of the stress on his hands, arms, shoulders, and back. The blackened blood of the Witcher sent a surge rushing through Geralt's veins, and his body became tense like the hard stone wall they climbed. Once making it to the top, Geralt and Yennefer fell with a leap onto one another and painfully regained their chance to catch their breath that escaped them moments ago. Geralt did not want to know what caused this avalanche, because he had a strong feeling that he was going to kill someone responsible without being able to stop his killer instinct as the Hexer he was.